There we go. All right, back legs. I think I'm good for right now there. I think, you know what? Last thing I want to drop in, because I have a little bit of spaghetti legs right now. I want to avoid spaghetti legs. I'm seeing it from here. I'm seeing it here. Do not want noodle legs. Seeing inside an artist's mind is the most invaluable one can get. Techniques will always be the same and vary from person to person, but thought process, on the other hand, precious. I absolutely agree. I was thinking, I was watching Chris Costa's workshop from a couple years back, and that dude, he gave me a little bit of different perspective, you know, and it's always awesome to see how people use different techniques. So, Manuel, very wise statement there, as usual. All right, back legs, we're going cat. So, let's see, we'll joint there, which I already kind of have started. I just want to mark it in with little markers for the joint. So we could start establishing exactly where the joint sits. That'll help us place where the muscles are going to be wrapping around. Again, down to here. These kind of jump out on the side there. I know it seems like a lot of markers to go through, but it's by setting all this up, it sort of gives you like a roadmap, right? So having these little bumps, and they're not even that elaborate, right? So it's not like I'm going in and I'm going, okay, this is how the femur on a lion, what's in this contour is very unique to the lion or to the African lion. I'm pretty loose in that way because I'm doing a fantasy creature, right? I mean, it's fantasy. I try and inject a certain amount of realism into it, and I think that, you know, you find that there's artists who will go very deep into anatomy, and that's where they live, and I think I have so much respect for that, because that takes a lot of studying, and it takes a lot of effort. And you have your artists that, I mean, if I look at there's a lot of stuff from the 60s and 70s in fantasy character art that is really just 100% imagination. And I think, you know, people may poo-poo that, they may look down on that, but honestly, I think that's a beautiful thing. I think it's something just that's raw imagination. It's untainted. I think that, you know, I mean, you look at, if you want to look at the world of painting, I don't know how familiar you guys are with painting, with the painting world or art history, but do you guys know who Rousseau is? He's kind of a contemporary with the post-impressionists. So Rousseau was what they would call a primitive, right? He wasn't traditionally academically trained as his contemporaries were, and he was kind of he was naive, but beautiful, stunning paintings. What stunning, beautiful art. He's a prime example of that. So I try and not weigh myself down with tons of anatomy. I want to know enough to understand mechanics. I want enough to be able to sell some realism. But I also want to let my subconscious take over a bit and let my child brain, and I know I keep on saying that, but it's so true. It's your child brain. It's your, you know, pillows become a fort, right? A park becomes a battlefield. You know, that child brain is so important to maintain throughout your life, in my opinion. Absolutely, Manuel. Enough to ground the design in reality so that people can relate to it somehow, but not to the point where it's so physically and reality-based that you just trap your creativity. Absolutely. That is a great echo. All right. So I have my landmarks for my body, and now I can, and I'm saving my feet. I'll save those for later on. But I'm going to reward myself with being able to go in and start work on the skull, right? So let's take a look at what we have here. I'm looking at this here, and I kind of like what I see. I don't know about the parrot. Looking at that there, I think a straight eagle skull is going to do the trick. So let's see. We have flat protrusion here. It can be one of our landmarks. I'm going to sharpen the beak. I don't know how large I want that to be. I don't know. For some reason, when the beak is too large, it reminds me of the Muppets. I don't know if you remember the eagle from the Muppets, but it ends up making eagles look a little bit silly sometimes. But let's see how I can strike a balance. All right, down into the mandible here. Let's drop that in. And this is a very unique structure to birds of prey, especially, I mean, that is most definitely an eagle. Even without all the eyes, feathers, anything, that reads eagle. So it tells me that there is a lot of that skull showing through. Also, this might be a design cue for me, because I could probably draw a few assumptions about the eagle, or I could infer a few assumptions about the eagle. That since so much of the bone is showing through, and if I look at the skull itself, the skull is actually, let me bring up a larger image of that skull, because I want to take a look at this and have us think about this a little bit. In the classes that I've taught in the past, I do like to talk about the skeleton a little bit, and why I think that, even if you may not know all the components of a skeleton, you may not know the name of each cervical vertebra, or you don't know all that stuff. You can infer a lot about a creature by looking at their bones. You can infer a lot about their anatomy by looking at their bones. Actually, I'll go to this skull second. The first one I'll look at is a gorilla skull. We'll do a little comparison between a gorilla skull and a human skull. And this is the easiest way I think I can illustrate it, where my head's at. So let's take a look at a nice photo. Is that Bone Clones? Bone Clones are just good. Yeah, it's Bone Clones. Bone Clones, by the way, is a awesome place to pick up bones of all sorts. The other one, Bone Clones, and it is Bones Unlimited. Is the other one? Or Skulls Unlimited. I'm sorry, Skulls Unlimited is the other one. Both great companies. So if we look at the human skull, right, we have our eye sockets, we have our nasal cavity, we have our mandible, and I want to focus on the mandible, and I want to focus on the temples, right? So the reason why the mandible, the contour here, is scooped out is because there's a muscle that sits in here called the masseter. The masseter goes up, hooks down here, up through a hole behind the zygomatic process, and attaches to the temporalis. The temporalis is the muscle that fills out this cavity in the skull. So whenever you see dips and ridges, just like there's a little ridge here and a dip for the mentalis that come up over this way, right? If you look at the orbicularis oculi, the muscles that move around the eye. You can see there's a groove there. But that's one way of looking at the surface. You look for those grooves and you go, okay, there's a muscle there, or there should be a muscle there, because that's where a muscle is attaching. So, or it occupies that space. So if we look at, this is going to tell us a lot about the difference between humans and gorillas, all right? So, or at least a big difference why gorillas have some they're very strong. They have a very strong bite. So this is where the area our masseter occupies and our temporalis, right? Now let's go look at the gorilla skull, and let's look at the same areas. And let's see if I can get a bigger image here than that. I think this is a little bit bigger. So what could you infer about a gorilla looking at those same two areas? If you know that a muscle occupies that area, and this is where the temporalis of a gorilla sits, and this is where the masseter of a gorilla sits, it makes, right, that's why they can bite down at 2,000 pounds per square inch, right? They have massive muscles. I mean, this is like the size of a human tricep. This is probably about most of the size of a human bicep. So when you're looking at the skull, you can infer a lot about a creature, right? So when it's very important to think about the skeleton. You don't necessarily have to know every bone, right? But you can still read the language. You can learn the language of the bones itself, not knowing that this is the pronatum or whatever. It doesn't even matter, right? It's just reading that language, knowing that how a muscle occupies an area and what a skull is telling you. So back to the eagle. I'm looking at this skull, and I've looked at a lot of animal skulls. I'd love to see him, Simon. It'd be cool if you posted some of those up. It'd be cool to see. Simon was saying that he had some pretty awesome 3D skull scans of gorilla and human from the 1024 3D scan store. They're good site for 3D scans. Absolutely, 1024. You guys remember that. Maybe I'll post it up for you guys. Or actually, Simon, could you post that up on the page for people to check out? I'll put up the links for Bone Clones and Skulls Unlimited too. So this eagle skull, looking at this, with all the grooves, I can tell that there's a large muscle that's sitting right here. It looks like there's some fairly powerful muscles that are sitting in here, which makes sense. But that wasn't the first thing that I noticed, right? The first thing I noticed was how thick this skull is compared to, say, even a vulture or, I don't know, if you're looking at a parakeet, right? Those bones are, thanks, Claude. I'll post them up on the page, on the class page, and just share those with everybody. Claude's going to post some links. So this is giving me some design cues, right? So I'm going, okay, well, if I don't want to just make any eagle skull, but I want to take a cue from nature, not necessarily completely imitate nature, that's something I can pull from that is very much in the realm of nature, right? It's an attribute of the eagle, and I'm just bringing that out.